Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. The ghost in our home. Here's my story of what happened to me and some of my friends. I was 19 at the time and had just moved out into my own place with a friend of mine, and then later my girlfriend at the time moved in with us. It was all good, had a nice little basement suite that, even though it looked brand new, the rest of the house and the actual neighborhood was pretty old. I'd say the house was built at least in the mid-late 50s. Anyway, it had only been about 2 or 3 days since my friend and I had moved in when I started experiencing nothing like I have ever before. The way it was set up was that the back door of the house was our front door. The upstairs had a door sectioning off their space, and a staircase led down to our place. The first experience was the door slamming. I had just come in from having a cigarette when I heard it. The door leading outside was closed. The door leading to the upstairs living space was closed, and the door leading into our place at the bottom of the stairs was closed. The sound came from that stairwell, and it scared the hell out of me. I was the only one home. My roommate was at work, and the people upstairs were out. Of course, when I told my roommate what had happened, he kinda scoffed at me and said that it was really nothing. And then my girlfriend moved in with us. One instance that involves two witnesses happened when we were all sitting in the living room watching TV. Both my girlfriend and roommate got my attention when they were both letting out gasps of astonishment before they told me that a spoon that had been resting on the edge of the cup had lifted up, pointed down, and dropped inside the cup. I didn't see it, so it didn't affect me. A couple of days later, my girlfriend comes out of the shower terrified, saying that she saw someone inside the bathroom through the shower curtain, and then proceeded to tell me that this person had pressed its hand into the curtain. My roommate had told me of this one time where he was shaken awake by an invisible occupant. It's important to let it be known that he is a very, very heavy sleeper, snores like an elephant, but somehow he was managed to be woken up by a mild shake. Another time, while lying in bed, I was kind of zoning out when I saw a light, almost like a ball right above my head. It didn't give off any residual light that could be reflected off of anything in that room. I didn't say anything until my girlfriend asked me if I saw it. It was strange because it didn't reflect anything, and more so because it was coming from an area of the room that had no light sources near it. Another instance with a light happened during a small birthday party for my girlfriend. Her friend stopped her and me to tell us that she had seen a light shooting across the ceiling. We kind of shrugged it off because at that point we were pretty much used to the activity going on. One day, during a weekend when both my girlfriend and I weren't working, we got probably the best occurrence. We were sitting in our room watching TV when we heard what sounded like our roommate knocking on the door. The way he knocks is almost like he's tired. He would make a light knock and then kind of brush his knuckles against the door right after. This is exactly what we heard. Exactly. And we were slightly convinced that it was him, minus the fact that he had left for work about 2 hours before, and there was no sign of anyone coming downstairs and opening the door. The second best instance was during a time when we were determined to get solid proof of this thing. We sat in my room in the dark with the door open just a crack. Of course, being in the dark, the light or lack thereof can play tricks. We all knew that as we were sitting there, so we didn't really expect anything to go down. That changed when at the exact same time, my roommate and girlfriend started panicking, saying that a black mass had come into the room and was right over the top of the both of them. The only reason I believe them is because they both reacted at the same time, not one after the other. One time during Halloween, the three of us, plus two of my ex-friends, were over, and we managed to get everyone in on a table tipping session. For those who might not know, Table tipping is where you have everyone rest their fingertips on the top of a table in hopes that the ghost would use collective energy of the group to be able to move the table. To say the least, it worked. The stool shifted about 2 inches towards me. As soon as it moved, we all lifted our hands up because none of us had expected it to work. We were all sitting cross-legged on the floor, so that ruled out any sneaky footwork of any kind. Most of my own personal experiences consisted of seeing, hearing, and feeling the entity itself. Unfortunately, most of what I saw would be during a mid-turn towards or away from it, so I never got a good look. My eyes, though, were the lesser of the receivers as I heard and felt a lot in that place. Most of the time I'd be sitting in the living room and I'd hear someone coming towards or leaving the living room or the kitchen area and then walk down the hall. I, as well as the other 2 people I lived with, could hear footsteps and shuffling in the hallway. The way the living room was set up, it was that the couch had the back facing the opposite side of the wall, and my roommate's chair was on the other side, getting a very good view of the hallway, in which he had seen movement. What I would see out of the corner of my eye all the time is what I would feel as well. I'd be sitting in the living room watching TV, and I'd feel someone come into the room and sit down beside me as if it were one of the people I was living with, except, of course, there'd be nobody there. Regularly, this would happen, to the point that it would get annoying, mostly because whenever I'd be watching TV and I'd feel this person walk into the room and sit beside me, I'd usually be watching the comedy channel. I'd laugh out loud at a good joke and look over to the person beside me expecting to see the same reaction that I'd been giving, yet I'd be alone. It seemed that whatever was with us had no real intent on scaring us or harming us. From what I understand now that I've gotten more into the paranormal is that it was an intelligent ghost, mainly because of how it seemed to mostly concentrate on my ex. It's been about 2.5 years since we lived there. I've often thought of going there and asking the current residents if they have experienced anything similar to what I have. Perhaps one day I'll do it. On a side note, I realize that old houses make noises that sound like they are something else, but I eliminated all possible logical explanations because, at the time, I was a skeptic. Since then, which was around 2006, I've had a few odd things happen to me. One time, about 3 weeks ago, I was playing guitar and noticed a white wisp kind of dart past my right side. It wouldn't have affected me because I most likely would have pinned it on my guitar reflecting light, but the wisp went under the neck of my guitar and over the gaming console that was in the line of my vision. Of course, I tried to recreate what happened, but nothing worked. After that little incident, one of my friends calls me on my cell phone. After the phone call, I noticed the battery was down to 1 bar, even though I charged it the night before. A few days after that happened, something else went down. I was watching a movie on my computer and ended up falling asleep in the middle of it. It was one of those naps where whatever is going on in the outside world is incorporated into your dream. So in my dream, the movie was in the background, but it was getting louder and louder until I woke up to someone saying, "Shh," in my ear. Also on the right-hand side. Again, I would have dismissed it as my subconscious, but I felt it, like there was actual breath behind it. More recently, I've been seeing shadows and vague apparitions on a near constant basis. Unfortunately, not hearing as much. I pretty much swear on all that I possibly can when I say this is real, especially the haunted house. We lived there for a year, and pretty much since day one, there was activity, even up to the day we moved out. Friendship Lane. I have lived in a house on a corner of Friendship Lane for 56 years. That house has been there since 1902 and was built on Indian land. I had no idea how many evil, murderous things have happened there. Let me tell you my tale. Since the day I moved in that house, strange, unexplainable things occurred. I would sit in the living room and all of a sudden the remote from the TV would fly across the room and slam into the wall. The front door would open by itself, as if to let someone in or see someone out. But I wasn't about to leave my dream home then. The wind chimes that I had hanging in the living room were just above the television, and I would sit and rock in the rocker, and these curtain chimes kept on falling off the hook. I picked them up, and every time I turned around, they would fall off. Finally, I got sick and tired of picking them up. I cussed at whatever was doing that, and it never did it again. Besides objects being thrown at me and doors opening and closing in the living room, the top attic, which was made into a bedroom, had a lot of activity. That was where my daughter stayed when she lost her job in California. One night, when she was sleeping, she felt her bed shake. Then all of a sudden, it violently began to thrash around. The closed door slammed open, and the clothes were spewed from their drawers. Her screaming woke me up, and I rushed to see what was going on. My wide-eyed daughter ran to me and demanded to never go in that room again. 2 weeks after that ordeal, I went to put up some clothes. The closet was extremely large, and I went all the way inside. Big mistake. The door slammed shut and trapped me inside. Fear consumed me as I banged on the door. I will never forget what happened next. A repulsive, rotting breath of air was breathing up my neck, making my hair stand on end. The door flung open. I was pushed out by a surprising force. That was the last time I went into that closet. The final major occurrence that happened in that house still haunts me to this day. I was laying in my bed all alone in that huge 4-story house, and I got the chills. My head was covered with beads of sweat, but I was cold. I was so dizzy I didn't notice the covers being thrown off me. All of a sudden, a hand slipped over my throat, and I battled for air. I looked straight ahead, only to meet the bloodshot eyes of something so unbelievably horrid that it would make a grown man cry for his mommy. In a complete adrenaline rush, I fought myself free and moved out immediately. I will never forget that night. Never. Ghost in the Attic. In 2000, I had moved into a very large house in Arizona. I rented a room from a couple that owned the home. After a couple of months of living there, the woman, Lainey, at one point told me about a ghost she had seen in the living room one evening as she was going to bed. Her husband was already in bed. I believed her, but had never felt any presence in the house before she told me this, so I never gave it another thought. I had lived there several months before an entity decided to make its presence known. I was rarely at the house as I am not a homebody. On the rare occasion I was home one evening, Lainey and I were sitting in the living room watching TV and talking. Her husband worked until late in the evening, so he was gone and it was just the two of us. We had been sitting there a few hours, and a couple of times we heard noises coming from the kitchen. Each time we heard a noise, we would stop talking, look at each other like, what was that? It sounded like things were being moved around, but the noises were brief enough not to warrant investigation. Not yet anyway. She then told me that she and her husband heard odd noises all the time and things would be moved. I needed to get up early, so I grabbed my comforter and headed for my bedroom. I got halfway down the hallway where my bathroom was, right next to the kitchen. At that very instant, I was near the bathroom. I heard a loud thumping sound coming from the attic just above the bathroom. It sounded exactly like someone had walked on a board, like those found in attics after they shifted their weight. Mind you, I had never been in their attic. I was now officially freaked out. I ran back into the living room and I asked Lainey, "Did you hear that?" She said, "I thought that was you." I said, "No, it wasn't me. Someone is in the attic." At this point, I was suspecting a ghost, but I wanted to investigate so that I wouldn't lie in bed all night wondering if some homicidal maniac was in the attic. I asked Lainey if she would allow me to go up there. I had previously seen the attic door in the ceiling of the garage, converted into an office, so I said I would meet her there after going to the bathroom. I really had to go. I was in my bathroom while Lainey was in the garage office pulling the door ladder down. I was in there about 30 seconds until I heard someone knock on one of the bathroom doors, very loudly. I knew immediately that that was a ghost. There were 2 doors to that bathroom, and you have never seen anyone run so fast out the other door toward the garage where Lainey was pulling down the ladder. I very excitedly asked her if she had heard the knock. She said she hadn't. It was a large house after all. On my sprint to the garage, I made a point to view the area where the knock originated, and no one was there. I searched all over the attic with a flashlight, where, after all, there were boards making paths to walk upon. All that I did see up there was antique furniture. Later that evening, she said that the moment she saw me run into the garage, she knew I had a ghostly experience. Now, as an adult, I have never slept with a light on. I do not scare easily. However, that night and the next, I slept with the light on in my walk-in closet. Of course, the next day she told me that she and her husband were going to California for a week. This was the couple that never went anywhere. That was now leaving me alone in the haunted house. Talk about bad timing. I didn't see or hear anything else after that evening, thank God. However, I started a conversation with a neighbor across the street where she had grown up and knew the previous owners that lived in Lainey's house. I asked her to describe what the man looked like. She described the very man that Lainey had described she had seen in her living room as a ghost. They even used the word distinguished separately to describe him, even though Lainey had no idea what the man looked like while he was alive. The previous owners had passed away before Lainey and her husband lived there. Interestingly, Lainey asked me one time if I had adjusted the grandfather clock. I told her no, of course not. I wouldn't be inclined to do so, nor would I know the first thing about doing so. She asked me again. My reply was, why would I? Evidently the clock was damaged or something. I don't think she fully believed me. I've thought about this since, as it bothered me that she didn't believe me. I think I now know what did mess with that clock. Number 13. When I was in about grade 6, my family and I moved into a new home. Since the first time I went in, I never liked that house, but my parents insisted they were getting a great deal and we moved in. The house was number 13 on the block. For the first year, nothing too spectacular happened, although I could never get to sleep without my mother's comfort, which was strange. The next year, when I was about 12, my mom had another baby. I used to have my room upstairs, which one of my little brothers and I slept in on a bunk bed. One night, I was sleeping on the top bunk, and my mom was putting my little brother to sleep on the lower bunk, as he was much younger than me and wanted her to put him to bed. My mom and brother had both fallen asleep on the bottom bunk, but in the middle of the night I was awoken by the old antique rocking chair in the living room rocking. At first I thought it was just my stepdad rocking my baby brother back to sleep, as it was normal when the baby would fuss in the night. But I then heard my stepdad cough from my parents' room beside mine. I also looked on and saw my mom and brother still on the bottom bunk. I was quite scared at that point. After probably 5 minutes, the rocking stopped, and there were 3 loud knocks on the wall. This absolutely terrified me, and I had to climb down to the bottom bunk with my mother and sleep there. I asked if my stepdad had rocked the baby the night before, and he said no. He had also heard the rocking and the strange knocks on the wall. Another strange thing happened a few years later when I was about 15. I had recently moved my bedroom to the basement, but had been terrified of sleeping down there. Also, the lamp beside my bed would strangely burn out way faster than a light bulb normally would. So in order to turn out the light, I would have to cross the room to the light switch and turn out the light. And I would run back to my bed and jump in as fast as I could, as I am really scared of the dark, and that room was just generally creepy. Anyway, one night I was up until 1:30. As I hung up the phone, I routinely walked across the room to the light switch, shut it off, and ran and jumped back into bed. Before I shut my eyes, I looked at my alarm clock to check the time, as I had to be up early the next morning. To my surprise, the LED numbers had changed into 2 capital letters spelling out the word no. I was absolutely terrified. The letter remained there for about a minute and then switched back to the time. I ran upstairs and had to persuade my mom to come down to the basement to sleep with me, as I would never have been able to sleep down there alone that night. It was a really weird occurrence which terrified me to no end. Throughout the years we lived there, many little strange happenings went on too. Everyone's shoes would be neatly placed in pairs in the front closet, and many times one shoe would go missing, and would be unable to find it for months, only to find the missing shoe later in a strange place. This happened several times. Also, my mom collected angels. Almost every single angel that would be brought to the house would end up with a broken right wing. This could be a coincidence, but it's still creepy, and it was definitely not done by any of my younger siblings, as they would not be able to reach most of them or knock them down in any way. And last year, once we moved out to a new home, my stepdad decided to tell me about the 2 sightings he saw of the same man. One when he was walking down the hall during the night. The man walked right out in front of him and crossed his path. The second was when he walked up the stairs into the living room and he saw the same man standing and looking out the window. Thankfully, he waited to tell me these things, as I'm terrified of ghosts, and I had a hard time in that house without knowing of those sightings. I'm now almost 17 and I'm still terrified of that house, but lucky for me, we have moved. My mom and I still like to joke that the house was number 13, making it unlucky and scary. But I think that's a coincidence, but still, it's spooky to add to all these occurrences. Haunted family. I live in a small town. The house I'm going to tell you about, we have moved from. Not just my family, but also my husband's family who lived there before us. We all shared in these experiences. Before we moved in, the whole family was over at the house for dinner. My husband, his brother, and myself were sitting in the living room, and an ashtray just came up off the table and dropped. Then my mother-in-law asked who called out for her, and we told her that no one did. We were the only 4 people in the house. Everyone else was outside. That was just the beginning. After my husband and I and our 2 sons moved in, things got worse. My husband and I both started to see a person outside the front door. There was a door-sized window next to the door, and we would look up and see her. My kids would tell us about the man in their closet. Now, my kids know that there is no monster in their closet, but they would tell us what he looked like, and I saw him one night. There was one bathroom with a door that connected my son's room with a hallway. One night, my son called for me, and I went to turn into this bathroom and saw him. He was wearing clothes from the 1900s and was very dark and skinny, which my husband was not at the time, so I knew it wasn't him. There was also a small child there. My husband and I would be home alone watching TV, and we would see a small boy peeking at us from around the corner. There were only 3 things that truly scared us. One was a Spider-Man comic my husband framed and hung on the wall. One day we were leaving the house and heard a crash in the kitchen. When we went to go find out what it was, the frame had flown 8 feet from the wall and was lying in the middle of the kitchen floor. It flew past my table and onto the other side. The second was a voice that several of us heard. It said goodbye as we were moving out, but the scariest one happened just to me. I was pregnant with my 3rd child and was having a hard time falling asleep one night. I had just rolled over on my side and was facing my husband when I suddenly could not move. I felt something holding me down. I tried to touch my husband's arm, which was only 2 inches away, but couldn't. I tried to say his name to wake him, but couldn't. This feeling lasted for a couple of minutes. When I finally could move, I stood up and woke my husband and told him about it. Then I said out loud to the spirits that I could live with them scaring me and my husband, but that I would not stand for them scaring my kids or harming us anymore. That is what caused us to move. But after I made my statement to the spirits, they did leave my kids alone. They just came after all of the adults in my family. I've also talked to several people who used to live in that house and learned that they had the same experiences as my family. An old house in Michigan. When I was a child, my family rented an old house in the middle of nowhere. I really don't have any good memories of living in that house. All the memories I have terrify me. The most frightening one was the time when my younger sister, my mother, and I were watching the movie The Never-Ending Story, and my mom decided to record the song that played during the credits at the end of the movie. She put a cassette in the recorder and pushed the button. When she went to play back the cassette, we heard a strange, raspy voice, and it said, "I am the troll. Get out of this house now." My mom immediately thought that someone had been playing around at the factory where the tape was made. So she took us to the store and we got some new cassettes. When we got home, she again tried to record the song. It did the same thing as it did the first time, only the voice sounded angrier. When my dad got home from work, she tried to play the cassettes for him, but there was nothing on either one of them. Another memory I have is of a night when our family was watching a movie together. My mom had stayed home from work because we had a terrible snowstorm. Nobody could get up or down our road, so nobody had even bothered to go out to check the mail that day. We heard a car pull into the driveway. The car door slammed shut. Someone stomped onto our snow-covered porch and pounded on the door. My dad got up to see who it was, but there was no one there. There were no footprints in the snow and no car in the driveway. There was no basement under the house, but anyone who sat at our kitchen table would swear there was. One could hear sounds coming from under the floor like chains rattling and objects moving around. This became so common that we didn't bother talking about them when we heard them. We had several dogs who disappeared for no reason. I can understand having 1 or 2 dogs run away, but we had at least 4 that I remember. At night, my sister and I slept in the same bed because we were terrified to sleep alone. We would beg my mother to let us sleep downstairs in her bedroom. Fortunately, my parents saved up to buy their first house and we were able to move. Now I live about 5 miles from that house, and it actually scares me to drive by. I don't think anyone lives there now, and it truly looks like the stereotypical haunted house you see in a movie. Sometimes when I watch a scary movie, it almost makes me laugh because those writers have no idea what scary really is. In the graveyard. I was 19 years old, so many years ago. Much smarter too, so I thought. This was the late 60s, and a small group of people I knew thought that they were witches and warlocks. Yeah, real scary. They were going to a seance, and one of the group, Sharon, invited me along. What a kick, I thought. I don't believe in anything I couldn't see, so I would go along to laugh at them. I asked where they were going. I was told they were going to the 100 Steps Cemetery, so nicknamed for the 100 steps you had to climb up from the road to get there. We arrived. It must have been 9:30 or 10 p.m. at night, a chilly November evening, appropriately dressed with fog for the occasion. We walked along respectfully among the graves of people mostly gone on long ago, our flashlights catching the names and dates of their passing. As we walked, Sharon suddenly fell to her knees in front of a grave whose stone read, Sharon 1952. Her head tipped up and her eyes rolled up to where all we could see were the whites. Now, the only other person whose nickname I remember 40 years later is Fox, and Sharon had a message for him. He considered himself a gray warlock and was trying to decide on going black or white, good or evil. Sharon normally had a high, shrill voice, but now she spoke with a low, gravelly voice, like something straight out of The Exorcist. The voice told Fox, "Your choice will be for black, or there will be consequences." And then Sharon collapsed to the ground. My disbelief had pretty much crumbled at this point, when I looked up and saw a huge dark shape moving towards us quickly through the fog. My disbelief was now totally shattered. It may have been just shadows, but we were not sticking around to find out. We picked up Sharon and practically flew down the 100 steps and into our cars. As I drove away, it felt like I had to struggle to keep the car on the road. An invisible force was fighting me. No one who was there talked about that night with me after that. I told others about it, about how it changed my perception forever of things I could not see. I never messed with the power of the occult after that, but I no longer put limits on my quest in understanding spirit or the universe either. Supernaturally bad. I live in a house in New Jersey that was built in the 1970s. My family and I have always believed that our house was haunted due to several occurrences that have happened over the course of the last 10 years. From hearing footsteps when we were all in bed, to feeling taps on our shoulders and backs, to inexplicable moving of objects, and much more. Visitors have also mentioned feeling and seeing things without us saying anything about our experiences and beliefs. My older sister, my mother, and I are convinced that someone was buried in the basement. The basement is without a doubt the eeriest place in the house, even when the lights are on. As I said, it was built in the 70s, and at the time the basement would have been dirt. There are a lot of stories I could share that explain this belief. However, I'm here to share one of our most recent and spooky experiences. About a month or two ago, we had a horrible thunderstorm. People in my area were advised not to leave their houses because there were trees falling in the middle of the streets. However, one of those trees fell on my older sister's house, so she came to spend the night at my house with my 8-year-old niece and 3-year-old nephew. We were all sitting on the couch watching TV and talking when my nephew ran into the kitchen. My mother and I went to see what he was doing. He was crouched down by the sink and kitchen counter, screaming and crying. We asked him what was wrong, and he told us that this is the only place where she can't see me. And when we asked who, he began to scream and cry even more, saying that she was very scary. He was borderline hysterical, crying and screaming. He wouldn't even let anyone pick him up. He refused to leave that area, which my mom and I found odd. We figured he would want to be around his family since he was so scared. He also kept saying he wanted to sleep there so she wouldn't see him. Eventually, my mom picked him up, even though he was kicking and screaming. She brought him into the living room around everyone else. He began to calm down. Then, not even an hour later, he began his terrified screaming and crying again and returned to the area behind the counter. My sister, mom, and I went over to talk to him to see if we could get anything out of him. He said he saw a very bad girl knocking at the door. She was very bad, and she had red eyes, and she was wearing a dress, and I could see her belly. She had sharp teeth, and she was really bad. She's knocking at the door. It took us another hour to get him to calm down again. Now, this might be one of those you had to be there stories, but I assure you, he was not making this up. He gave much too good of a description, and I cannot even describe how terrified he looked and sounded. We had never seen him like that before. He was petrified out of his mind. Another thing that just adds to the creepiness of the story is my family and I will often hear knocking at the door, and there will be no one there. This will happen a couple of times a week. My mom and I were talking about the incident recently and discussing how strange we thought it was that he described her with sharp teeth and she was knocking at the door. For those of you who may or may not know, according to vampire folklore, or whatever you may call it, you have to invite a vampire into your home or they can't enter. Not to say that we think it is a vampire, but it is an interesting facet we noticed. But you never know. Perhaps it was. This is a crazy world we live in. My mom and I have actually always believed in, not vampires necessarily, but the use of vampires as a metaphor for people or things who suck the life out of you, so to speak. Anyhow, this was a very frightening experience, even for my mother, sister, and I, and we didn't even see it. I honestly get the chills just thinking about it, especially at night when I'm alone. I'm curious, has anyone else had an experience like this? Has anyone seen themselves or know someone who has a ghost resembling my nephew's description? I hope that you do, but then I imagine you probably hope that you don't.